Thank you. Welcome back, everyone, to our second presentation of the evening. Our second speaker is Nana Mukheria, who is a second-year PhD student whose main field is English studies. While teaching literature, she became interested in classics, as it is the beginning of everything. Nana teaches world literature and research at an international school and has recently become interested in the life of a young researcher. And I hand over to you for your presentation this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Greetings, everyone. So, as you already know, the subject of my interest is antiquity in the Soviet Union, and I'll briefly start with the relevance of the topic today. Generally, you definitely know that film and animation in modern society are developing dynamically and gaining more and more popularity. And films and animations are the best means of reaching larger audiences, so you can easily reach any kind of message to masses. So animated films and generally film is a vehicle for cultural memory, collective consciousness, and identity. And Soviet animations provide a meaningful picture of totalitarian society and regime. The role of Soviet animation in the establishment of socialist ideology is generally studied. The principles and significance of the selection of cartoon plots, including narratives related to antiquity for the promotion of socialist ideals, have not been systematically investigated. That turns out to be my topic for the research. So the paper examines how the stories related to the Greco-Roman world were presented in animation of the Soviet period, and based on this analysis of Soviet animated films, it investigated why Soviet animators turned to antiquity and whether or not the Soviet ideology was used for a political socialization of society. So, the purpose of this research itself, we have two main things to identify if ancient stories were adapted to socialist reality, and generally, what was the purpose behind this Greco-Roman tradition? Was that propaganda used by Soviet Union or just socialist ideology? So, when reading different type of literature, we see number of interesting sources that claim Soviet animation was a powerful propaganda tool for many years, and animators used and tried to promote collectivism through media. And one of the researchers, Einstein, who is actually Norwegian researcher, says that art in the Soviet Union was like a metallurgical factory which released a product processed in the desired form and vision. So that means that they very often try to manipulate with different messages. So, very briefly, we have to speak about the prehistory of animation in the Soviet Union. And it is important to mention that from 1930s, Soviet animation filmmakers officially made no secret that they were very much interested in Disney movies and they tried to copy number of things from Disney style. But in 1935, some of Disney animated films were shown at the first Moscow International Film Festival, but cartoons projects that could not be adapted to communism in terms of genre did not become an area of interest for them. And in the same decade, it should be mentioned that particularly children became the target audience of the animation. So during the World War II, situation a little bit changed. Soviet film industry suffered a serious decline because cinema in general was not a priority of the state. And a kind of revival in the history of Soviet animation when we see the popularity toward the field enhances began in the 60s when Brezhnev actually came to the power and the Soviet animation industry experienced something very different. So censorship was controlled somehow, the interest was boosted, and himself, Brezhnev, tried to support the field greatly. So the main themes of Soviet animations were the following. They based on the fairy tales and legends, animators made some modifications of traditional plots and adapted them to the Soviet reality. Mainly, there were themes connected to hard labor, social protest, and general the messages that could indoctrinate different generations. I will briefly discuss two examples of Soviet animation. Habt Horse. The film promotes the ideas of collectivism and social equality that were central to Soviet ideology. And in The Tale of Tsar Sultan, that was publicly released in 1984, the film glorifies the history and culture of Russia and contributes both to the strengthening the idea of the superiority of Russian nation and the patriotic spirit, which is the main value in Soviet ideology, as we see later from the different sources. So my main focus was on seven different cartoons connected myth-based plot that were not studied, as I have already mentioned, and I will discuss few of them. You definitely remember, the Medea story that was published. Kolchis, the cartoon was published in 1935. It is a multi-studio of Georgian industry. A 7-minute animation is the earliest example of animation made on the theme of Greek myth in the Soviet Union. This is a black and white film written by Lado Gugushvili, who actually is a very famous Georgian painter, Gudiashvili. The film is not a depiction of any episode of Argonaut myth, by the way. The film shows the ongoing changes in agriculture in the 1930s in the Socialist Republic of Georgia, particularly in the Colchian field. It can be said that the golden fleece is the only symbol that connects the story told in the cartoon with the myth of Argonauts. The fact that Jason is wearing a Georgian national dress in the movie, in my opinion, indicates that the Soviet government is not a foreign system for Georgians, but a national power that respects the local culture. Why was the myth of Aragon chosen to promote the large-scale plan of Kolchis swamps? It is obviously that such a transformation of the narrative identified with the traditional and mythical past of Kolkheti indicates that the symbols and stories established in the old pre-Soviet period should be replaced by a narrative dedicated to the new socialist reality. So, I'll speak now about the different part that is a very famous cartoon as well, Dragonfly and Ant. The Dragonfly and the Ant is a screen adaptation of Aesopus' famous fable. In the first frame of the 9-minute long cartoon, we get to know the dragonfly, which turns out to be very lazy, who wants always to sleep in a peaceful manner, and who tries to mock ants, hardworking ants, who actually are working during the whole summer, getting ready for winter period. Animation, unlike Aesop's fable, is more rigorous in its telling. In particular, there are two main plot moments with Greek writer, which are presented differently in the animation. First, during the year, the dragonfly tries several times, generally, to take some kind of advantage from the ants, but it is done in vain. At the end of the parable, the ant shelters his cold and hungry friend anyway. So ants decide to help somehow that lazy dragonfly. It is obvious that the purpose of the short film Dragonfly and the Ant is to call a person to work, to be responsible, and to properly plan for tomorrow, which is a pretty interesting message for the person who represents the labor class. Unlike Aesop fable, the animation does not leave us with positive feeling and hope that someone can come to us as a savior and cover us in times of need, and that a person should take care of himself. Actually, that was the main message of the cartoon, that every person is responsible for his own individual prosperity. This animation, which is a weapon for social awakening, points to the contrast of human types, the ideology of social classes, and the political or economic context that was problematic in the Soviet Union. Using the example of two insects in the animation shows two different classes and two different type of a person. And it is very important to mention the motto that we hear many times in the cartoon, and not here, but we see that written, "Pora работать," meaning in English is "it's time to work." So definitely we can assume that Soviet Union's main message was once again to awake social classes and help them to be more responsible in many means. Okay, I'll discuss one more that is Return from Olympus. The 18-minute animation belongs to Alexandra Snezhko-Bolskaya, which tells about the hero Heracles. So, a demigod, of course, Heracles has relationship with both gods and humans. At the beginning of the film, he pleads with his father Zeus to let him go to Earth before sun rises. And Zeus, of course, allows Hercules, let's say, to land on Earth. But we see that Hera is not pleased with this decision. And she, in many ways, tries to go against. So, this is a brief plot analysis. Beyond the traditional narrative, two moments that are emphasized in the animation are very important. First, by freeing Prometheus that we see in the cartoon, Heracles is happy to be against the will of the god. Second point, Heracles understands the importance of Prometheus' transmission of the whole fire to people. In the animation, it is clear that Hercules takes that holy fire and gives that to people as a sign of courage and mutual support that Hercules may have towards people. At the end of animation, Hercules realizes that humans are undoubtedly the ones who desire peace. What is interesting about the cartoon? Interesting is that Hercules himself is the representation of the Soviet Union, and the main message the Soviet Union cartoon and industry was trying to convey was to represent the system itself as a savior, the system who can know better how to defend its own people. Therefore, we can assume that this animation represents a kind of social message according to which giving up privileges and helping people should be the priority of a true hero, and at the same time, people are the main priority of that particular regime. Although the story and animation is entirely based on and follows a version of Greek myth, there are also some interpretations to represent modern challenges. For example, we see there airplanes, we see war there, people going against each other. There are several moments that have a symbolic meaning as well. First, Hercules, as we said, is stronger and more dangerous by human nature than semi-god nature. Hercules delights in going against the will of God, which may encourage the rebellious spirits of particular person to go against the system. Confrontation, which the ruling forces is undoubtedly read as one of their messages. So, if we assume that Hercules could represent the Soviet Union itself, the above message take on a propaganda tone. This animation represents the main political message of the time, which encourages contemporaries of the Soviet period to make the interest of their own country, people's problem-oriented actions and values the only truth for which making any consciousness is accepted by the system itself. I'll discuss one more that is well known as by the name Orgonauts. According to the plot, we see that two young boys meet an old man on the shore or ragged sheep. Jason actually is that old man. Jason tells the children about his adventure in Colchis and how he met Medea. In the story of Argonauts, that is represented in this cartoon, we remember that Medea is the one who supports and helps Jason to get that golden fleece. The status of, but this cartoon does not traditionally follow the whole point of the Greek myth. What is interesting is the cartoon is the representation of the protagonist, Medea, that we see from a different perspective. So, what can be the aim of this particular cartoon? The statue of women in the Soviet Union between 1936 and 1953 changed dynamically. Since 1936, the state policy in relation to women has clearly changed, giving some kind of dominance to women. The new constitution that was approved later stated that women should be equal to men in any mean, so in life or in type of work, politics, or other type of business as well. Women could combine paid work with their motherhood, take advantages of paid maternity leave, and raise children through maternity homes, and plus pursue any kind of career they wanted. So, as we see, this example represents the dominance of the woman, and generally, the woman is represented from a different perspective. That's why I guess the directors tried to show another side of women by representation of Medea, who turns out to be a strong woman. I'll skip some things, and I want to highlight the importance of the last animation represented in 1991 that is called Venus. The 2 minute animation created in the year of the collapse of the Soviet Union. It is important that that was the end of the Soviet Union. Represents the work of art that was the subject of admiration for everyone in the society. The plot of animation unfolds without any dialogue, telling us about the statue of Aphrodite, which all the passerbys admire once again. After some time, one of the passerbys will notice that the statue is without hands. He will want to correct this defect, let's say, by adding hands with clay on his own. Later, someone comes again, thinking that the statue is not beautiful enough and needs to be dressed up, and changes according to his own taste and viewpoint. Gradually, more and more people will want to make changes according to their own taste, and eventually, we see chaos in the society, and the statue is absolutely distorted. So, what can be the message? Suddenly, it rains, and the rain washes away everything that passerby have added to the statue. The work of art returns to its original form, and the ignorant inventation of the society turns out to be fruitless. So, when analyzing the film, the political situation that reigned in the country at the time should be taken into account. It is very important. The new publicity policy introduced in 1986 by the last General Secretary of Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, which condemned all ideological censorship and preached freedom of media and speech, represented the so called new ideology of the Communist Party. At the dawn of the collapse of the Soviet Union and the establishment of a new political order, we see that this animation can represent main message that the society is not taking the right steps toward the political condition, people, according to their individual points, even create more chaotic condition, and some changes for the system is absolutely necessary. So that was the message that somehow was prognosticated and vivid from that cartoon. Uh, for conclusion, I want to highlight following things that, as main finding, we can assume ancient myths were popular and familiar to viewers of all ages during the Soviet period. Ancient, mostly Greek myths are distinguished by interesting, dynamic, and adventurous stories, of course. In addition to the propaganda value, we see that ancient myths were included in the cartoons for the educational purposes as well. Ancient myths, as a rule, contained very deep moral, but of course, it was a way to adapt to a more interesting social message. So, for the conclusion, if we summarize, we can say that animated films of the topic of antiquity were made between 1936 and 1991. Films were informative, educational in nature, and served to introduce Soviet ideologies through various symbols and hidden messages. For the plot of the Soviet cartoons, narratives are selected from antiquity, definitely, according to the authors of the film, could be adapted to the main message of the Soviet ideology 100%. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Nana, for that amazing presentation. And I would like to open the floor now um, to questions.